BMW was his and my brother told his girlfriend my BMW was his and tried to take my keys permanently. Now he's banned from driving. My brother Colin had borrowed my BMW once. Just once. His girlfriend Ashley had been making passive-aggressive comments about her ex's Mercedes, and Colin was feeling the pressure. He'd been dating her for 3 months, and the hints were getting less subtle. "It's not about the car," she'd say. "It's about ambition." So I felt bad and let him take my M3 for their anniversary dinner. The next morning, Colin texted me. "Hey, dinner went amazing. Ashley loved the car. Mind if I borrow it again Friday?" Her sister's in town and wants to go to this upscale place. I said sure, trying to be the supportive older brother. That Friday became the next Friday, too. Then Tuesday for Ashley's company happy hour. Then Saturday for her friend's birthday. "Come on, you're not even using it," Colin said when I finally pushed back after 3 weeks of constant requests. "You literally work from home. The car just sits in your garage collecting dust." "I use it plenty. Groceries, gym, meeting friends downtown." "Yeah, but I actually need it. Ashley's coworkers think I'm doing well at work. I can't show up in my Corolla now. They've seen me in the BMW. So tell them the truth." Colin looked at me like I'd suggested he set himself on fire. "Tell them I borrowed my brother's car? That's humiliating. Ashley would be mortified." The entitlement escalated gradually. First, he'd ask days in advance. Then it became day of requests. Then just notifications. Picking up the BMW at 6. Not a question anymore. A statement. When I'd say I had plans, he'd get manipulative. "Seriously? I already promised Ashley we'd take her parents to dinner in it. They're expecting a nice car. You want me to look like a liar? You could just tell them it's mine." God, Jason, why do you have to make everything complicated? It's one night. Her dad's a lawyer. I need to make a good impression. The guilt trips were relentless. "Mom always said family shares. Must be nice not caring about your brother's happiness. Ashley thinks you hate her because you won't help us out." He started keeping the car longer without asking. A 3-hour dinner became overnight because Ashley had wine and couldn't drive her car home. A Saturday afternoon became a full weekend because we decided to drive to the coast last minute. When I'd complain, he'd flip it around. "You're seriously upset that I kept your car an extra day when you had no plans? That's really selfish, man." The breaking point came when I found out Colin had been telling people he bought the car. I was at a bar with mutual friends when Tom congratulated me on being such a generous brother. "What do you mean?" Colin was saying how tough the BMW payments are, but he lets you borrow it sometimes since you helped him with the down payment. He said I helped him with the down payment? "Yeah, said you gave him like $5,000 as an early birthday present. Pretty cool of you." I pulled out my phone and showed Tom the registration. "This is my car. I bought it. I pay for it." Tom looked confused. "But Colin's been posting pictures with it for months. Ashley tags him in stuff, calling it his baby." I checked Instagram. There it was. Colin posing against my car. 6 months with this beauty. Ashley commented hearts and my successful man. Her friends congratulated them. Her mom commented about how proud she was of Colin's hard work paying off. I confronted Colin that night. He didn't even try to deny it. "Look, it's easier than explaining the whole borrowing situation every time. Ashley's friends would think I'm a loser if they knew it wasn't mine. So you're straight up lying." "It's not really lying. I use it more than you do at this point. I put gas in it. I got it washed and detailed last week." "You detailed my car without asking?" "It was dirty. Ashley's parents were visiting. Her dad's a partner at a law firm. I couldn't let them see it covered in dust." "That's not your call to make." Colin rolled his eyes. "You're being ridiculous. Look, here's what I'm thinking. We should just share it officially. I'll pay half the insurance and we'll split the week. I need it on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and weekends for Ashley. You get Tuesday and Thursday. The insurance is $200 a month. You're offering me $100 to use my own car 2 days a week? It's totally fair. I need it for my relationship. You're single. You don't get what it's like having a girlfriend with expectations. Expectations you created by lying. Whatever. Will you do it or not?" I said no. Colin called me selfish and left. 2 days later, I realized my spare key was missing from the kitchen drawer where I kept it. I walked straight to the garage. The empty space where my BMW should have been made my stomach drop. The concrete floor showed the tire marks from where Colin had backed it out. I pulled out my phone and called him, straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. 3 more times. Every single call went directly to voicemail, which meant he'd either turned off his phone or blocked my number. He knew exactly what he'd done and was avoiding the confrontation. I searched online for locksmiths who could rekey a car. The first 3 places I called said they couldn't come out until next week. The 4th place had an opening tomorrow morning at 9. I booked it, even though that left me without my car for the entire night. I texted Kyla what happened. She called me back within 2 minutes and said she was coming over. Kyla arrived 20 minutes later with a bag of takeout she'd grabbed on the way. She set the food on my kitchen counter and immediately started pacing. She told me this wasn't borrowing anymore. This was theft. She said Colin had crossed every possible boundary and I needed to stop making excuses for him. She asked if I was really going to let him get away with literally stealing my spare key and taking my car without permission. I told her I didn't know what to do since calling the police on my own brother felt extreme. She looked at me like I was insane and said Colin was counting on that exact response. We ate the food while I kept checking my phone. Nothing from Colin. At 11 p.m., my phone finally buzzed with a text from him. He said he'd borrowed the car for an important dinner with Ashley's parents and would return it tomorrow. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement that he'd stolen my key. Just a casual notification like he'd borrowed a pen. I typed back that he stole my key and my car, and if it wasn't back in my driveway by 8 a.m., I was reporting it stolen to the police. He read the message immediately but didn't respond. I barely slept. At 6 a.m., I was already checking the driveway every few minutes. At 7:30, I heard a car pull up. I looked out the window and saw my BMW in the driveway. Colin was climbing out, and an Uber was waiting behind him. He shoved something in my mailbox and got into the Uber before I could even get my shoes on. By the time I reached the driveway, the Uber was already turning the corner. I opened the mailbox and found my keys. I unlocked the BMW and immediately noticed the gas gauge sitting just above empty. The back seat had fast food wrappers and a crumpled napkin. I checked the glove compartment and found a parking ticket from downtown dated yesterday, tucked behind my registration papers. $45 for an expired meter. Colin had apparently parked downtown, let the meter expire, gotten a ticket, and left it for me to deal with. The locksmith arrived right at 9. He was an older guy with gray hair who'd probably seen everything. While he worked on rekeying the locks and programming new keys, he told me spare key theft was more common than people realized. He said family disputes over vehicles happened all the time, usually when one person felt entitled to something that belonged to someone else. He asked if I wanted him to make just one new key or two. I told him one was fine since I wasn't giving anyone else access ever again. While he worked, I went through the entire car more carefully. Colin had added his own insurance card to my glove box, tucked right next to mine like he actually had coverage on my vehicle. All my radio presets had been changed to stations I never listened to. The seat position was different. The mirrors were adjusted for someone shorter. Even the climate control settings were changed. Every small detail showed how completely Colin had claimed my car as his own property. He hadn't just borrowed it occasionally. He'd moved in and made himself at home. The locksmith finished and handed me 2 new keys on a simple ring. He said the old keys wouldn't work anymore and suggested I keep the spare somewhere Colin definitely couldn't access. I paid him and waited until he drove away. Then I got in my car and drove straight to Colin's apartment without calling first. I knocked on his door. Colin answered, looking like he'd just woken up, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. Ashley was visible behind him on the couch. She stood up the second she saw me and started talking before I could say anything. She told me I was being selfish because family helps family. She said Colin needed the car for his career advancement, and I was holding him back by being stingy with something I barely used. Colin just stood there and let her fight his battle for him, not saying a word in his own defense. I looked past Ashley directly at Colin and told her the truth. I said Colin had been lying to everyone about owning the car. I said I never gave him money for any down payment. I said he literally stole my spare key out of my kitchen drawer and took my car without permission. I said he'd been posting on Instagram for months pretending the BMW was his, letting everyone congratulate him on a purchase he never made. Ashley's face went completely pale. She turned to Colin and asked if this was true. Colin opened his mouth and started making excuses about how he'd planned to tell her eventually. He said it was complicated, and he was going to explain everything once the timing was right. He said I was making it sound worse than it was. Ashley didn't say another word. She grabbed her purse off the couch, pushed past both of us, and walked straight out of the apartment. The door slammed behind her. Colin exploded at me the second she was gone. He said I'd ruined his relationship. He said I'd humiliated him in front of his girlfriend. He said I'd destroyed months of building trust with Ashley by exposing him like that. I told him he ruined his own relationship by building it on lies. I said he needed to post a correction on Instagram immediately, admitting the car was never his. Colin said absolutely not. He said posting a correction would destroy his reputation. He said everyone who'd congratulated him would think he was pathetic. He said Ashley's friends would tell her he was a loser and a liar. He said there was no way he was publicly humiliating himself like that. I pulled out my phone and told him he had 24 hours to come clean publicly. I said if he didn't post the truth himself, I would comment on every single post with screenshots of the car's registration showing my name, the insurance documents in my name, and the purchase paperwork proving I bought it. That evening, my dad called. He asked me to go easy on Colin because he was going through a hard time with Ashley. I explained exactly what Colin had done. I told him about the theft of my spare key. I told him about the months of lying to Ashley and everyone else. I told him about Colin's manipulation and guilt trips. Dad kept minimizing everything. He said it was just brothers sharing. He said I was overreacting because I didn't use the car that much anyway. He said Colin needed it more than I did since he had a girlfriend to impress, and I was single. He said family was supposed to help each other out, and I was being difficult over something small. I hung up on Dad, feeling something shift in my chest. This wasn't new behavior from him. I'd watched him make excuses for Colin since we were kids. When Colin borrowed my bike without asking and returned it with a bent wheel, Dad said boys share things. When Colin took money from my wallet in high school, Dad said I should be more understanding because Colin was stressed about grades. When Colin crashed my first car during college and lied about what happened, Dad convinced me not to press the issue because it would hurt Colin's insurance rates. Every single time, Dad positioned me as the problem for wanting basic respect and boundaries. The pattern was so clear now that I couldn't believe I'd missed it for years. Colin never faced real consequences because Dad always stepped in to smooth things over, always pressured me to be the bigger person, always made me feel guilty for not just going along with whatever Colin wanted. I texted Colin that he had until tomorrow morning to post a real apology on Instagram, admitting the car was mine, or I'd handle it myself. His response came back within minutes, claiming I was being unreasonable and asking why I had to make such a big deal out of everything. I didn't reply. The next morning, my phone showed a new Instagram story from Colin. I opened it expecting an actual apology, but got something completely different. The story showed a photo of the BMW with text overlay talking about misunderstandings and how family shares resources and sometimes communication gets complicated. Not a single word admitting he'd lied. Not one mention that the car was actually mine. Just vague language that made it sound like we had some kind of joint arrangement that people had misinterpreted. I screenshot the story, then went to his profile and found 3 posts where he'd posed with my car claiming it was his. The first showed him leaning against the driver's door with the caption about 6 months with his baby. The second was from Ashley's birthday dinner with her tagged and hearts in the comments. The third showed him washing the car in my driveway with some caption about taking care of his investment. I pulled up my car's registration on my phone and took a clear photo showing my name as the sole owner. Then I found my insurance card and photographed that too. Finally, I dug out the original purchase paperwork from when I'd bought the M3 2 years ago and photographed the sales contract with my signature and my financing information. I went to the first post and commented with all 3 photos attached. I tagged Ashley and every single one of her friends who'd commented congratulating Colin. My comment was simple and direct, stating this was my car. I was the only owner, and Colin had been borrowing it without permission while lying to everyone about owning it. I did the same thing on the second post and the third post. 3 comments with the same documentation and the same explanation. Then I sat back and watched what happened. The response was immediate and intense. Within 20 minutes, people started replying to my comments asking Colin what was going on. Someone asked why he'd lied about something so easy to verify. Another person said they'd always wondered how Colin afforded a BMW on his salary. Ashley's friend posted a comment asking if Ashley knew the truth. More people kept piling on with questions and confusion. Several of Colin's friends sent me private messages. One guy said he'd suspected something was off when Colin got weird about letting anyone else drive the car. Another said Colin had been bragging at work about his new purchase, and now everyone there was going to find out he'd lied. A third person just said thanks for clearing things up because the whole situation had seemed strange. Then I got a message from someone named Nina, with Ashley's last name in her profile. She introduced herself as Ashley's older sister and said Ashley was completely devastated and humiliated by finding out the truth this way. Nina explained that Colin had been pressuring Ashley to move in with him over the past few weeks, talking about his financial stability and his ability to provide. Ashley had been seriously considering it based on Colin's apparent success, which included owning a nice car and having his life together. Now Ashley felt like an idiot for believing him and for defending him to me. Nina thanked me for exposing everything before Ashley made a bigger commitment like signing a lease with Colin or getting more seriously involved with someone who clearly wasn't who he claimed to be. I messaged back saying I was sorry Ashley got caught in the middle of this, but Colin had built his entire relationship with her on lies about his financial situation and success. Nina replied that Ashley was done with Colin and already blocking his number. That evening around 10 o'clock, someone started pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole and saw Colin standing there swaying slightly with his eyes unfocused. He was drunk and clearly angry, hammering his fist against the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I didn't open it. Through the door, I could hear him yelling about how I'd ruined his life and destroyed his reputation and got him in trouble at work. He said his manager had called him into the office that afternoon because several coworkers had seen the Instagram posts and comments. The manager expressed concerns about Colin's character and judgment, questioning whether someone who would lie so extensively about personal matters could be trusted with professional responsibilities. Colin demanded I delete all the comments immediately and post something saying there had been a misunderstanding. I told him through the door that he created this entire situation himself by lying for months to everyone who mattered to him. I said the natural consequences of his choices weren't my responsibility to fix. I said he could have avoided all of this by simply telling the truth from the beginning, but instead he'd stolen my property and built an elaborate web of lies. Colin kept yelling and pounding for another 5 minutes before finally leaving. I heard his car start up and drive away with the engine revving too hard. The next morning, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I answered and heard a woman identify herself as a representative from my insurance company. She said they'd received a request to add Colin as an authorized driver on my policy and wanted to verify this was legitimate. I told her I absolutely had not authorized any such request. She explained that someone claiming to be me had called yesterday afternoon trying to add Colin with full permissions to drive the vehicle. The caller had known my policy number and some basic information, but hadn't been able to verify my security questions. The agent had flagged the whole thing as potential fraud and wanted to confirm with me directly. I told her my brother had stolen my spare key and been using my car without permission while claiming he owned it. I said I definitely did not want him added to anything and asked if I needed to file a fraud report. She said I could if I wanted, but for now they'd simply note the attempted unauthorized change in my account. She suggested I might want to document everything just in case I needed it later for legal purposes. I thanked her and immediately started a new document on my computer, listing every incident with dates and details. Later that afternoon, Nina messaged me again. She said Ashley had done some digging after their breakup and discovered Colin had also lied about his job title and his salary. He'd been telling Ashley he was a senior analyst making $70,000 a year when he was actually a junior associate making $45,000. The inflated numbers had matched the lifestyle the BMW suggested, making Ashley believe Colin was financially stable and successful. Nina said Ashley felt like a complete fool for not questioning things sooner, but Colin had been so confident and convincing about everything. She thanked me again for exposing the truth before Ashley moved in with him or accepted what had been starting to look like a potential proposal. Ashley had apparently found an engagement ring receipt in Colin's apartment while getting her stuff, which made the whole situation even more upsetting since she'd almost committed to someone who wasn't remotely who he'd claimed to be. I took the BMW to my regular mechanic the following week for a routine oil change and inspection. The mechanic knew me and my car well since I'd been coming there for 2 years. While he was doing the inspection, he came out to the waiting room looking confused and asked if I had a brother. I said yes, and asked why. He pulled out a work order from 3 weeks ago, showing Colin's name and signature authorizing $1,500 worth of cosmetic upgrades, including new rims, a custom spoiler, and tinted windows. The work order listed my account for billing. Colin had apparently come in claiming to be the owner and saying he wanted to surprise me with the upgrades as a thank you for letting him borrow the car. The mechanic had thought it was weird, but Colin had seemed so confident and knew details about the car's service history. Fortunately, the mechanic had called me to confirm before actually doing any work, and I'd been out of town and missed the call, so nothing had been done. But I would have been billed for all of it if the mechanic hadn't tried to verify first. I thanked him for checking and asked for a copy of the work order with Colin's signature. 2 days later, Dad called again. This time, he wanted me to apologize to Colin and help him save face by telling people we co-owned the car together. He suggested we could say we'd both contributed to the purchase and just had a miscommunication about how to present that to others. Dad said this would let Colin recover some dignity, and maybe even get Ashley back if he could prove the situation wasn't as bad as it looked. I finally lost my patience completely. I told Dad that he'd been enabling Colin's lies and entitlement for years by always making excuses and protecting him from consequences. I said every time Colin did something wrong, Dad pressured me to accommodate it and made me feel guilty for wanting basic respect. I said Colin had never learned to face real consequences or take responsibility because Dad always swooped in to fix things and blame me for not going along. I told him I was done participating in that dysfunction and Colin needed to experience the actual results of his choices for once in his life. Dad got quiet for a long moment before saying I was being cruel and hurting the family. I said the family was already hurt by years of enabling behavior that let Colin think he could lie and steal without facing any real problems. Then I hung up. Kyla came over that evening after I texted her about everything that had happened. She suggested we should check whether Colin had access to any of my other accounts since we'd grown up sharing everything and he clearly had boundary issues. We started going through my passwords and security questions, changing everything to information Colin wouldn't know. While doing this, we discovered he was still logged into my Netflix account under a profile he'd created months ago. We found him logged into my Spotify too, using my premium subscription. Small things, but they showed how completely Colin had blurred the lines between what was his and what was mine. helping himself to whatever he wanted, without asking or even thinking it might be wrong. 2 weeks went by with no contact from Colin. Then my phone buzzed with a text from him. The message was longer than usual and actually sounded genuine. He admitted he'd got carried away trying to impress Ashley and made terrible choices he wasn't proud of. He said he'd been lying to himself as much as to everyone else, convincing himself the car situation wasn't that bad because he'd wanted so desperately to be the successful guy Ashley seemed to want. He acknowledged he'd stolen from me, violated my trust, and then made everything worse by refusing to take responsibility. He asked if we could eventually rebuild some kind of relationship, saying he knew it would take a long time and he needed to work on his honesty and his sense of entitlement. He said he'd started seeing a therapist to figure out why he felt so desperate to appear successful that he'd sabotage his own brother. I typed out my response carefully, trying to find the right words that wouldn't sound harsh but also wouldn't leave room for misunderstanding. I told Colin I appreciated him reaching out and acknowledging what happened, but an apology was just the starting point. Trust wasn't something that came back because of one text message, no matter how sincere it seemed. He'd need to show me through his actions over months, maybe longer, that he actually meant what he said about changing. I explained we could be civil at family gatherings and act like brothers in front of Mom and Dad, but the close relationship we used to have wasn't coming back anytime soon. I wasn't lending him anything. Not the car, not money, not even my Netflix password. He needed space to figure out his priorities without me enabling him the way Dad had been doing for years. I hit send and felt a weight lift off my chest, knowing I'd set clear boundaries instead of leaving things vague and hoping he'd somehow understand what I needed. 3 months passed with minimal contact between us. We showed up at Dad's birthday dinner in July and made polite conversation about work and the weather. Colin asked how my BMW was running, and I said fine, and that was the extent of it. At Thanksgiving, we sat at opposite ends of the table, and Colin brought a new girlfriend named Sarah, who seemed nice enough and drove her own Lexus. I noticed he didn't offer to drive anywhere, or make a big deal about cars at all. We exchanged maybe 10 sentences the whole day. It felt strange having a brother I barely spoke to, someone who used to be my closest friend growing up. I'd accepted our relationship might stay surface level forever, and honestly, I felt okay with that. Setting boundaries hadn't made me a bad brother. It made me someone who respected myself enough to walk away from dysfunction instead of drowning in it. Dad still dropped hints every few weeks about how family should forgive and move forward, usually right after he'd talked to Colin. I'd listen politely and change the subject. I'd learned that protecting myself wasn't selfish, and sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was let them face the real results of their choices without rushing in to fix everything.